Hello, what we're going to be covering in this video is the lab at the end of lesson 4.5, which is table views. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be creating a meal tracker application that will display a list of foods grouped into 3 sections, one for each meal of the day. So first thing we want to do is we're going to go ahead and create a new project called Meal Tracker, and then we're going to go ahead and set up our storyboard. So let me just go ahead and minimize the window here. We will go into Xcode and we will create a new Xcode project. Again, we want to select our single view app, so I'll just go ahead and click on next, and then after that I need to go ahead and specify the name. I will call it Meal Tracker. And the one thing you want to remember, since the version of Xcode we're working with, there is the option of the user interface to choose between Swift UI and Storyboard. We're going to continue to create Storyboard user interfaces in CIS 265. So if you do not see the Storyboard after you create the app, you want to make sure you select the correct user interface to use. So we'll just go ahead, click on next. I will default it to my desktop, so I will just go ahead and click on create. So what they want us to do next is they want us to go ahead and set up the storyboard. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to delete the UI view controller that comes with the storyboard. So I will just go ahead, click on the main storyboard, and once it comes up, I'll click on the view controller scene and I will just hit the delete key. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be adding a navigation controller, and when we add that navigation controller, we'll get a UI table view controller that will get added for us. So I will just go ahead and delete that. So the next thing I want to do, the book says to go ahead and add a UI table view controller from the object library and embed the scene in a navigation controller. There's a shorter way to do that. All you have to do is click on the objects library, and I will type in navigation controller, and when I drag in that navigation controller, voila, a table view controller comes with it. So you do not have to do that extra step. So I'll just go ahead and drop that in, decrease the size to about a 75 there. What they want us to do next is the table view will default to having one prototype cell. So what we need to do is we need to go ahead and change that cell. Let me just click on table view and make sure I have my table view cell. I will go ahead and select that, and what it's going to change to is we're going to change it to a subtitle. So we'll just go ahead and select subtitle. So what we have is now we have our title, and below that we have our subtitle. The other thing the book does not talk about, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select click on my root view controller, and I'm just going to change the title of that to meals. So I will just go ahead and make sure that gets changed next. Okay, so after we've done that, then what I need to do is I need to go back into my table view cell, and we need to specify an identifier. And this is used when we DQ the information for each one of our cells that are going to appear in our table. So what we need to call this is food cell. So I will just go ahead and specify food cell and hit enter. So we've gone ahead, we've changed that information. What we're going to be doing, since we're going to be having multiple sections within our table view, we need to go ahead and update the table view and change its styles to group. So what I need to do is I need to select, click on my table view, and then under style we're going to change it to group, because what we're going to have is we're going to have a specific foods group for each one of our meals. We're going to have 3 meals: a breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and that's how we're going to be grouping the information in our table. So what we need to do next is I am going to go ahead and click on my viewcontroller.swift file, and I am going to delete that because we are not, since we deleted the view controller out of the storyboard, we do not need this file either. So I will delete that. Then what we need to do is we need to add a table view controller, a UI table view controller to our app. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select my meal tracker, right click on that, select new file, and it will be a Cocoa Touch class. So let me just go ahead and select that, and I will click on next. And you want to make sure when this selection comes up, choose options for your new file, you want to make sure you select a subclass of UI table view controller. A lot of times this will default to the last view controller file that you created, Cocoa Touch class, and you want to make sure that we're using a UI table view controller, and then we're just going to go ahead and rename it, and what they want us to call it is our food table view controller. So I will just go ahead and click on next and make sure it's within my meal tracker directory. So I'll click on create. And now my tableview controller.swift file has been added. The last thing we need to do is we need to go back into our main storyboard, click on our tableview controller, and what we need to do is we need to specify that custom class that we just created, our food table view controller, so that gets associated with the actual source file that we have out there. So that was step one in their directions. In step two, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and create our model objects. So first thing I need to do is I need to select my meal tracker folder, and then we're going to create a new file. So I'll just click on File, New, and a file. This is just going to be a Swift file, so I will just go ahead and select Swift. And what it's going to be, the first one we're going to create is going to be the struct for our meals. So I will just define it as meal, and I'll click on Create. And we need to create one more file, so I'll just click back on Meal Tracker, right click, click on New File, and what we want to call this is we want to call this food.swift. So I will go ahead and update that file. Okay, so what we're going to be using is we're going to be using structs for each of our data model types. So what we're going to do is in our food struct, food.swift file, we're going to create a struct, and what we're going to call it is food. And then within that, we're going to have two properties. The first one is name. We're going to define it as a constant, and it will be of type string. And then the second property will be description. And again, what we're going to define that as is a string also. So that's our food struct. So now we're going to go ahead, I'm just going to hit a Command S to save the file, and I will go ahead, click on my meals file, meal.swift file, and we're going to create another struct here. And what we're going to call it is meal. And the properties, the first one, it'll be a let constant, and it's going to be the name of the meal, so that will just be a string. And then the next property will be a food type, so that's why we created our food structure. We're going to call it food, and it's going to be an array of foods, so we could have multiple foods for each one of our meals, so that's why we're going to go ahead and define that as an array. So let me just go ahead, Command S this, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and in this is part 1, and in part 2 what we're going to do is we're going to go to step 3 where we implement our UI table view data source.